We do have an agenda change. We're going to pull the resolution awarding inmate telecommunication service, and we'll be bringing that back in 2 weeks. With that, we'll ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Fellers?
Here.
Beduja?
Here.
Girl?
Present.
Gorel? Present. Hoffman?
Present.
Jury?
Present.
Kelly?
Here.
McDonald?
Present.
Nicolosi?
Here.
Red? Salgado?
Present.
Schultz?
Here.
Tassoni? Webster?
Here.
Westcott?
Present.
Wilson?
Present.
Piando?
Present.
Booker?
Present.
Boomer?
Here.
Crosby? 18 present, 2 absent.
Thank you, Clerk Mullins. With that, I would invite a volunteer from our board, with Mr. Tassoni absent this evening, a volunteer from our board to lead us in prayer. Mr. Nicolosi, thank you very much. Please stand.
Dear Lord, we stand before you today as legislators for our great county here in Winnebago. We ask for your guidance to make the right decisions. We ask for your patience. And most importantly, we ask for your peace so that everyone can prosper. In your name, amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Nicolosi. Our first item, I'm going to have Amanda and Ann come on up for about 10 minutes and give us a quick overview of a couple of things going on in purchasing that will just be kind of a baseline set for some future discussions at the Operations Committee and then back here at the full board. So if I could have you ladies come up, please. Thank you.
There we go. Hi there, thank you. So I'm giving a short presentation with Ann. There's a handful of slides. You don't have them in front of you. My apologies for not printing copy. However, I believe Julia is actually emailing the full presentation to you right now. Here's the good news. Your presentation that I'm sending you has bonus slides. It doesn't have, it's not limited to the ones that we're going to talk through with you today. As the chairman said, we're going to move quickly through this to get to regular board business. But the reason we decided it was time to put some purchasing information in front of you is that Ann and I have been feverishly at work on purchasing policy, on purchasing practices within her department. And the long and short of it is that the board will see in the near future. I'm not going to promise a date at this point. My fantasy date had been 9/30, but let's just say it'll be close to then. We are looking to fully replace our purchasing ordinance, start to finish. A little history on why we think we need to do that. As you're aware, we've had some rocky times in the purchasing department in the last few years. And the board made some good decisions around changes to the purchasing ordinance back in 2015. They were, as a result of what was happening at the time, I think that there were probably some rush decisions, and we definitely need to recommend some changes for the board to consider. But with that, you know, the good news is that when you start from scratch, such as the chairman, myself, and Mrs. Johns, you get to put fresh eyes on something and build from the ground up. Much like our budgeting process, we're taking, let's say, a zero-based approach to our purchasing process and practices. I want to thank Ann for joining us. I've appreciated the outpouring of respect and welcome that she's received. You know, she's a 32-year professional in the Department of Procurement and Contracts. She's published on the topic, trained hundreds and thousands of people on the topic. So I definitely feel lucky, but I want to make it clear that I feel lucky in general for our overall purchasing department. The people who work for her work tirelessly. They are hard workers, and the three of them get a lot of work done every day. So anyway, I have this note about how, you know, back before the internet, Anne was doing purchasing, and I don't remember why I had that note, but okay, I thought it was worth mentioning. Yeah. So let's go. There we go. So I get to do the fun part. I get to throw a few statistics at you, and then Anne's going to take you through a little bit of our findings in terms of the research we've been doing. Anne came in the door, and there was a lot of low-hanging fruit in terms of cost avoidance. But there's a combination of things here. You've got cost avoidance. You've got money literally written back to the county in checks for various rebates and also overpayments that we've made that she found. All told, though, over the next 5 years, we've found over $1.8 million in actual money back into the county's pockets, which is very exciting. So thank you, Ann and team. What's that made up of? About 218, almost 219,000 in one-time things that happened. We can get, again, down into the weeds, and we have the weeds for you if you're interested in them. And then that 500,000 in cost avoidance over multi-year contracts. We've got 2 to 5 year contracts on the books right now where reduced pricing gained through renegotiating those contracts. And that's, just to be clear, that's if it's a 2-year contract, we only showed the 2-year price. If it's a 3-year, we showed the 3-year cost avoidance. So it's about $500,000 over the next 5 years in those type of savings. And then another 2.25 thereafter, really into infinity, just in how the renegotiations have happened. And that's after 4 months. So, and there's a long list still of things to dig into. So I'd like to believe in maybe another 4 months we might see this number grow. It's huge. But again, that's 4 months, and I think I've done enough celebrating. I'm going to let Ann take it from here and sort of talk about where we are in her department.
Thank you, Amanda. In the last 4 months, I just want to point out some statistics. And the statistics are, I don't know, I went back 15 months before I started, just to show there were only 20 bids put out. And we put out, my department, we put out 26 in the last 4 months. And those of you on the committees that have to look at these resolutions, you see them on a regular basis. We had, 3 tonight, I think. And at the same time, At the same time, we are only going to be going forward because we have a lot of contracts out there that are multi-year contracts that have expired. Some of them expired 3 and 4 years ago. I'm trying as fast as I can to get caught up on it, going out for bid. But as we are out of date by 3 and 4 years, our pricing's out of date, everything is wrong about the way we're proceeding with those purchases. But at the same time, we have a lot of departments that aren't really adhering maybe as well as they should to the $12,000 threshold where they should come forward for bidding. And so we're really working hard with them. I'm trying to visit every couple of weeks a different department to learn what's going on with them, to try to explain the processes and the procedures. And that's the other reason you will be seeing even more resolutions coming forward for purchases. They might be single year or they might be multiple year. So how do we do this? What are our practices and what are our methods? Okay, so the way it is set up now, we have several methods that we use. We have our informal and we have our formal. The formal is what you mostly see. You see the invitation for bids and you see the request for proposal. Those are the bids that ultimately come your way, the over 12,000 for both cases. And they could be single purchases or multi-year purchases. If it's over 12,000, we use one of those methods. But there's this under $12,000 threshold that there's a lot of things that go on. And if it's, we really have a limit of $500. It's not really in the ordinance, but it's kind of a line that we use, that we have to get one quote. Over 500 to 12,000, we try to get 3 quotes. But this is where we have to make sure the departments are adhering and getting their 3 quotes for the under 12,000. Then we also use specialists once in a while, in the example of using brokers for insurance and for energy. And tonight we will have resolutions before you that were handled by both types of brokers. And then in the case of construction, we use an architectural firm quite often to do the bidding. We still do it through the department, but we use them as our experts. And the one thing that I really believe strongly in is cooperative purchasing. Cooperative purchasing consists of several things. You have joint purchasing, you have your state contracts, you have IGAs, which we're all familiar with, and then we have something called piggyback contracts. And we will be using all of them, and we are using all of them. And some examples of some of the things that we've already brought forward to you. You might remember about a month ago we did the Otis elevator. Well, that was an example of a U.S. Communities contract that was done, and that was a cooperative purchasing. The dump trucks, the second day on the job, we had a bid for dump trucks, and I checked the state contract against the bids that were coming in. We ended up saving almost $5,000 a truck, and we bought 4 of them. So, and that was just the state contract. And then a piggyback contract is an example of where we, as the county, we piggyback off the Rockford Park District for our motor fuel. And again, the city of Rockford piggybacks off of our office supply contract, which you're going to pass tonight. So those are just some of the tools that we use in the purchasing department. Now we're going to get into some examples of some research that we've been working on. And it's been really interesting to do this. And then when you get the full PowerPoint presentation, you'll see additional columns that will cover a lot of other aspects of this research that we've been doing. But you'll see the part in green is that's the Winnebago County statistics. And as you know, in late in 2015, the threshold went from 30,000 down to 12,000. So we wanted to show you what other communities are doing. So these are the ordinances from each of the counties in the local area, and then the city of Rockford as well. So what can I say? We're all over the place. What's kind of interesting is the board authority really varies to me, which I thought was interesting on construction type contracts and also on service contracts. They maybe are different than your standard bid. You didn't do the other one about the individual ones?
That's it?
Okay.
We decided to keep this short one.
Yeah. So anyway, as we are wrapping up our research, we're eventually going to be rewriting the purchasing ordinance. We hope to do that from scratch, and we hope to have your support. Quite a few of the clauses in the purchasing ordinance literally are from 1996, where it talks about bids by fax. The internet is hardly mentioned. It's very much outdated. And so we need to really bring that up to the 21st century standards. And we hope to work through the committees to really work with us to get the purchasing ordinance in a better position so we can move forward.
Thank you, Ann. Mr. Webster.
Yeah, it seems like purchasing and finance kind of go hand in hand sometimes. And I wonder if Carla had some input into any of this that you're talking about this evening.
No, not into this work. It is definitely true that what's true is that the purchase order and the payment process is definitely intertwined, meaning that anything that is procured, anything that goes through the contract process will ultimately land as a long-term receivable or a long-term payable managed through finance. But in our current state, the purchasing and finance are two separate departments.
Yeah, I understand that, but I just thought it would probably behoove the finance department to be apprised of everything that's happening in purchasing, so that there are no surprises.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Mr. Jury.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Haney. First of all, thank you for your report, and I look forward to taking all these savings that you're giving us, which is going to drastically, I believe, decrease our deficit if you're on track. It's one thing to say what we're going to do, then the other is the proof in the pudding. So let's track this and see exactly how much we're saving and if that reduces our deficit. And then getting back to Mr. Webster, yes, we are going to work with you on these, but I didn't think of that. I sincerely believe that finance should be brought in on any purchasing thing and have some say on it. So we're going to look into that. We'll work with you on your recommendation. We'll look and see what other counties do, how they tie that into the purchasing thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jury. Any other questions? I think one of the things that's been spoken to by Mr. Webster and Jury, I think hits at a core point, is that we want to bring what we're doing in line with best practice. And one of the things that I don't want to have understated, though, is alignment between departments, as well as alignment with the board. And I think more that we strive for that, the better off we're going to be. So thank you very much, Ann, and thank you very much, Amanda, for your report. Next item of business, we have our board member correspondence. Oh, I skipped a step, I apologize. Next item of business, we have our approval of minutes. May I please have a motion to approve the minutes from June 22nd and lay over the minutes from July 13th. I have a motion by Mrs. Crosby and a second by Mr. Boomer. Any questions on the minutes before us? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much. Next item of business, board member correspondence. Mr. Webster.
This isn't so much probably as correspondence as just something I am compelled to say something about. You know, just when we thought it was safe to go back in the water, we're getting sharks are circling again. And I'm referring to this business with the chief judge. And, you know, as a board, we stood pretty much in solidarity opposing the wishes of the judge, or I should say, the asking that the judge wanted us to do for what he wanted. And so we stood together, bipartisan, and we turned him down. And so the judge didn't like that, so he called a press conference and tried to air it out in the court of public opinion. Well, that didn't bear any fruit for him either. And so now we're going to the point where the chief judge is calling the big shots down in Springfield to come and fight the battle for him. And I guess that's appropriate. Springfield's done so much for us already. Thank them. Anyways, it seems kind of odd that chief judge, I'm pretty sure he's an attorney as well, why he would even have Springfield fight the battle for him. And I hope that we can get through this thing here in timely fashion and not tie up the court system and not drag Springfield into the matter and get everyone more upset than they already are over this issue. And that's my 2 cents worth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To add to what Mr. Webster just mentioned, I think this board is sending the rest of the department heads a clear message that we will not tolerate all these budget amendments like we have in the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Mr. Jury.
Thank you, Chairman Haney. I just would like to remind the board, you may or may not know that our circuit clerk had a bad accident in his home here a while
while back, and he is home recuperating. He did a severe, very severe break to his ankle. I had contact with him today, and he's now on crutches and cast, but I just thought maybe you might want to send him a card or give him a call. I'm sure he'd appreciate it. It's going to be quite a healing process. He really, really did a bad job with his ankle, so I want to mention that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jury. Any other comments by board members? Seeing none, we'll move on to the chairman's report. My remarks will be brief, but I also wanted to just comment on the recent decision by the judge to engage legal counsel and to sort that out. I guess I'm left with just one reaction. So last night we have a joint caucus meeting. We talk about several issues. There's debate, difference of opinion, strong passion around ideas. The process is messy, but inclusive. And when we go in representative government in any public entity I've seen, we go through that same messy process. And when an administrator wants to recommend a board policy, they work with their other department heads, they work with the state's attorney's office, with myself, then it comes to a committee, then it goes to the board for final approval. And by the time it gets there, it's been scrubbed, beat up, looked at publicly, repeatedly. I think that's a better way to do business than when we disagree, have a judge issue an order. And my concern is not about one budget dispute, because they come and go. I served on the Rock Valley College Board, and there are many brilliant department heads there too, who I respect. There are department heads here at the county who I respect tremendously. And they all have good ideas, and they all are passionate about what they do, the way that the people in this room are. But when we disagree, and we want to change the process and change the rules, I think that's a dangerous message to send. And that's what we've seen happen in Springfield the last couple of years with litigating our way to governing, and it concerns me. And we are going to disagree. I think it makes us better, and it should be a tough process to make decisions with $190 million of other people's money. So I look forward to continued debate, fights, disagreements with this idea. We're trying to move forward and do what's best for this community, and the alternative to anything but this is unacceptable to me. With that, I would move on to our next item of business, and that is our consent agenda. May I please have a motion to approve our consent agenda? Mr. Hoffman on the motion, Mr. Jury, Mr. Nicolosi, and Mrs. Gurl on the second. Any discussion on the consent agenda before us? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Consent agenda passes. Thank you very much. Next item of business, standing committee reports. Finance Committee, Mr. Biondo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Finance Committee would like to make a motion to approve budget amendment 2017-023, which is county miscellaneous. It was an unallowed grant cost of $89,061 from IEMA. They demanded the money be returned because they had like 8 parcels on the Black Hawk thing that was not in scope of the work, and so therefore they want the money back, and we have to do it this way. So I move that we approve it.
We have a motion by Mr. Biondo, a second by Mr. Westcott and Mr. Jury. Any discussion on the budget amendment before us? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes.
That concludes our report.
Thank you, Mr. Biondo. Zoning Committee, Mr. Webster.
Thank you. Your zoning committee has 4 items on our agenda tonight. Now, these are all in for first reading and for layover. Item A is a special use permit, SU 0617, special use permit for group quarters. And this is in County Board District 9. The Zoning Board of Appeals recommended approval 6-0, and Zoning Committee followed behind with the recommendation of approval for at 7-0. Item B is a map amendment, Z 1217, and this is a map amendment to go from A1 Ag to Rural Ag. This one is in County Board District 1. And ZBA recommended approval 5-1, Zoning Committee recommended approval 6-1. Item C is Z 1317, also a map amendment. And this is from R3 multifamily to CG commercial general, County Board District 8. And item D is Z 1417, also a map amendment, zoning from Ag priority to commercial general, and this is also in County Board District 8. If you're following along, item C and item D are from the same applicant. And back up to item A, that one comes with conditions which are attached. And that's what I have for your reading tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Mr. Webster. Next item of business, economic development, Mr. Westcott.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chairman. We have no report, but we do have a meeting on Monday, August 1st at 5:30 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Westcott. Next item of business, Operations Administrative Committee, Mr. Jerry.
Thank you, Chairman Haney. First, resolution we have before you is an HVAC scheduled service agreement, and I move for its adoption.
I have a motion by Mr. Jury on item B and a second by Mrs. Crosby. Mrs. Goral, any discussion on item B? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Mr. Jury.
Thank you, Chairman. The next one is an ordinance adopting sick pay policy, and I'd like to speak to this. In caucus, we've asked to send this back to committee. However, if it would please my colleagues, I would like Mrs. Haymaker to come up and speak to this. And then after her presentation, I will ask if you want to send it back or move it forward. Thank you.
Would you prefer I come up, or I can
Right,
also
that's
just
fine.
from here? Okay. So we put the policy through committee 2 weeks ago. The sick policy was developed because we had not previously had one, meaning there's actually no place in our current ordinance where a sick policy exists. And instead, the sick practice has been what has been applied to county employees, and it's been applied uniformly for bargaining and non-bargaining employees, and is listed in the bargaining agreements, meaning that both or all of our bargaining agreements currently are legal documents which have the sick accrual rates, which are represented in the policy that went through committee. So again, we essentially restated what was current practice, and without a policy, we will continue through human resources to exercise that practice. So that's just state of fact, point one. Point two is that effective January 1st of 2017, there's a state ordinance that takes effect, which will require us to allow employees to use 100% of their annual allotment of sick pay towards the care of a family member, an extended family member. And the statute in question does allow the county to enact a policy which provides restrictions on that of up to 50%. Meaning that if an employee has 9 vacation days banked in their sick accrual and their grandmother gets sick, they can, by law, use all 9 days towards taking care of grandmother. Now that sounds wonderful, and of course there's going to be occasions where we're going to try to be helpful with such a thing, but there does create a burden on the departments related to when an employee has significantly more sick accrual. And the county feels, and it is the practice, and it is why the statute is allowing us to develop a policy that limits such activity. So the purpose of the policy, more than anything, was to provide a limitation on the number of sick accrual hours that an employee could use towards the care of an extended family member. Does that help, Mr. Drury?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Committee members, does this change your position? You want to move this forward or send it back to committee?
Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The key issue that I raised at caucus last night is not been addressed, and that I understand that the scope item B clearly says that if a collective bargaining agreement is in conflict with the provisions of this policy, that the agreement will control, which I fully expect. I understand that collective bargaining is what determines the benefits for the majority of our employees. However, I still believe that the maximum that's stated under the guidelines at the beginning of Section C are just phenomenally huge. And we've had conversation in the past. Mr. Jury led the charge in addressing phenomenal accrual of vacation, and over a period of time we were able to reduce our liability substantially. But as I look at the math here in terms of the hours that are allowed to accumulate, you would have an equivalent problem with the sick pay based on the policy that's before us. So I would like us to strongly consider dramatically reducing the maximum that's allowed to carry forward in this policy, and that would be why I would want it to go back for review.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Schultz. Mr. Hoffman?
Mr. Hoffman.
Thank you, Chairman and Gary. Amanda, if you go back and reduce those for the non-bar unit members, is that retroactive to the ones that already have a year's worth of sick time in the books?
No, sir, I don't believe we would be able to take away anything which has already been accrued. I believe that we would, if the committee were to take this up and make a recommendation, it would have to be effective as of a new date, likely the date of the new policy. And similar to what occurred when the board made a decision on the vacation accrual, there would be like a sick 1 and a sick 2, and employees would have to exhaust their sick accrual from the previous policy, and then the new policy would be that which would say expire at a different rate.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. I have Mr. Kurlinkus on a quick comment, and then I have Mr. Fellers and Mrs. Crosby.
I just wanted to address one thing. The basic difference between sick pay and vacation pay and the issues that came up there is we do not pay sick pay out when employees leave, regardless of how many they have accrued. That's not done. They can use it toward retirement. That's a different issue, and that's an IMRF issue. But the county, if you have 400 sick days, when you leave the employment of the county, you don't get paid for 4. You get paid for 0 sick days. So that's the big difference between vacation accrual and sick day accrual.
Thank you, Mr. Kurlinkus. Mr. Fellers. Mrs. Crosby.
I move we send it back.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor to refer this back to committee. I have a second by Mr. Boomer, Mr. Wilson, Mr. Fellers. All those in favor of referring it back to committee signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion to refer back to committee passes. Mr. Jury.
Thank you. The next resolution we have is an agreement with Optimum RX for employees who buy prescription drugs. and I move for its adoption.
We have a motion by Mr. Jury. We have a second by Mr. Wilson and Mrs. Goral. Any discussion by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Mr. Jury.
Thank you. The next resolution we have is awarding quotes for bulk natural gas supply, and I move for its adoption, and this has been recommended by our state's attorney with the contract.
We have a motion by Mr. Jury. I have a second by Mr. Hoffman and Mr. Nicolosi and Mr. Gurl. Any questions by board members? Yes, Mr. Gurl.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Attorney, just about how much money do we expect to save off of this new deal that we're making?
I'll go for that to Ann.
Ann?
$116,000 per year for the next 3 years.
Mr. Gurl, anything else? Thank you, Mr. Gurl.
Thank you. That's going to help reduce our deficit. Remember that. Every little bit helps. Okay. Got a vote in a second.
Any other questions by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Mr. Jury.
And the next resolution, we have a resolution awarding proposed bids for office supplies, and I move for its adoption.
We have a motion on letter F by Mr. Jury, a second by Mrs. Goral, Mr. Hoffman. Any questions by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Mr. Jury.
Thank you, Chairman Haney. Our next meeting will be August 14th, I believe, and that's all we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jury. Next item of business, Public Works Committee. Mr. Kelly.
No report. However, our next meeting will be next Tuesday, August 1st.
Thank you, sir. Next item of business, Public Safety Committee. Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have no report. However, last month, Animal Services had 1,233 calls for services. We took 182 dogs, 255 cats, 1 pot-bellied pig, 1 ferret, 4 guinea pigs, 1 horse, 4 domestic rabbits, 6 birds, and numerous wildlife. At this time, we've sent out to rescue 9 dogs and 6 cats, which we should do more of. We have adopted 49 dogs, 59 cats, 4 guinea pigs, 4 domestic rabbits. We've adopted out a chicken, 4 domestic birds, and 1 pot-bellied pig. That'd be 122, but I would like the board to note something here too. The cat population that we have is 255. That well exceeds the limits and cages at the facility. So I want you guys to keep that in mind, and keep in mind those calls of service that we have out there for our people. That's 1,233 calls those people got on last month alone. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that was, you were waiting for that.
Wait. Thank you, Mr. Fiducia. Next item of business is new business, board appointments. On the Board of Review, a gentleman that we were very excited to appoint back a few months ago had to step off of the Board of Review, and we wish him well. But that leaves us with an opportunity to fill that position, and you have received, I believe, documentation on Jay Douther, who is with us this evening in the back. Jay, give a wave if you don't mind. And I know a few board members introduced themselves to Jay. He does come highly recommended out of Tom's office and by the Board of Review, and is extremely well credentialed. So I did want to bring this to the board as my recommendation to fill this open Board of Review position, and see if there's any questions. Seeing none, Mr. Westcott.
Thank you, Chairman. Could we have are we going to lay this over, or are we going to try to vote on it tonight?
That's a board decision. This is being read in, so this is what normally happens. it's introduced at a meeting and lays over to the next board meeting unless the board decides to do otherwise.
I would like to make that motion that we review it, or do it tonight.
We have a motion to approve. Excuse me, I'm sorry. We have a motion to suspend the rules and appoint Jay to the Board of Review this evening. Thank you, Mr. Westcott. A second by Mr. Wilson, a second by Mrs. Gorel, Mr. Biondo, and Mr. Webster. So now we have the motion before us. May I have a motion to approve Mr. Douther to the board? Oh, I stand corrected by our beloved state's attorney. All those in favor of suspending the rules signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion to suspend the rules passes. May I have a motion to approve Mr. Douther to the Board of Review? I have a motion by Mr. Westcott, a second by Mr. Jury, Webster, Biondo, Wilson, Gorel, and Crosby. Anyone else? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Welcome, sir. Thank you for your service. Thank you, Mr. Westcott. With that, I would ask the board's indulgence to go to closed session for a brief update on threatened impending litigation. May I have a motion to go to closed session? Mr. Fellers on the motion, and a second by Mrs. Gorel. Mr. Jury and Mr. Boomer. All those in favor of going to closed session signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion is adjourned to closed session. The meeting